Hello everyone! JRD96 here with a brand new video. As you can tell by the title, it's another story time video. Now today's topic, just like the previous story time, is about pro wrestling. Now you've probably been wondering for a while, how did I get into pro wrestling? When was the first time I ever watched it? What made me become a fan of it? What was my first pay-per-view? My first Royal Rumble? My first WrestleMania? My favorite wrestlers growing up, etc. Well, strap yourselves in, boys, because it's clobbering time. So let's talk about how I got into pro wrestling. So let's talk about how I got introduced to pro wrestling for the very first time. So this happened all the way back in 2005. When I used to live in Franklin Square, I had a childhood friend named Michael. He and I used to hang out a lot during that time. We were like 8, 9 years old at that time. We would always just be playing video games pretty much. We weren't really going out to play ball or anything. We just chilled in his house or my house playing video games nonstop. But one of the games that he had on PlayStation 2 was WWE SmackDown vs. Raw. Now this was the very first SmackDown vs. Raw game they had. So at that time I'm like, what is this? Like, I wasn't really familiar with pro wrestling. I didn't even know it existed. So this video game was my first ever introduction to professional wrestling. And I remember playing it and having some fun with it. Like, even though I didn't really understand what was going on here, I just found it as like another one of those fighting games like Smash Brothers at that time. Like, I wasn't familiar with what it was. Like, I didn't grasp what it actually was. And it actually happens on live television. Didn't understand it. And I remember vividly, the person I always played as in the game was this one guy that caught my attention because he just reminded me a lot of Spider-Man because he wore a mask. And that was Rey Mysterio. So, there you go. So, of course, I would always play as Rey Mysterio because he reminded me a lot of Spider-Man because I'm a huge fan of Spider-Man. So, that's how I got introduced to professional wrestling. Now, when was the actual first time I actually watched it live? So, the first time I actually watched it was on November 25th of 2005. Literally a week after Eddie Guerrero passed away. Now, this episode of Friday Night SmackDown took place 2 days before their pay-per-view Survivor Series. And the big storyline that they were doing at that time was a SmackDown versus Raw, elimination tag match. And you had the best stars from Raw, the best stars from SmackDown, and, they would do a traditional Survivor Series tag elimination match, to see who reigned supreme. SmackDown or Raw. This episode actually happened in the UK because they had the big UK flags on the set, so they were in the UK. The only things I remember from this episode vividly was a matchup that Booker T was in that ended in a draw, which led to a best of 7 series between Booker T and this guy. You probably know who I'm talking about, but I refuse to say his name. The one thing I remember vividly from this episode was the ending. And it was a no-holds-barred lumberjack match for the World Heavyweight Championship. The World Heavyweight Champion, Batista, was taking on Randy Orton. Don't know why they were doing this. Now looking back at it, there was no way Batista was losing the title. Also, Batista was all bandaged up around his, upper chest area, around his back, because he got choke slammed on Raw earlier in the week by Big Show and Kane in a parking lot brawl skit they did that featured a bunch of the Raw and SmackDown guys. This elimination tag match they had at Survivor Series was Team SmackDown, which was Batista, Rey Mysterio, Bobby Lashley, JBL, and Randy Orton, taking on Team Raw, which was Shawn Michaels, Big Show, Kane, Carlito, and Chris Masters. So that was what they were building towards. The reason why they had a lumberjack match and it had all the SmackDown superstars surrounding the ring was because they were fearing that Raw could strike again. And not even a minute into this little no-holds-barred match, Raw superstars come out and it turns into a huge brawl between Raw and SmackDown. Oh my gosh. Chaos was all over the place. Randy Orton RKO's a couple guys, then gets sweet chin music by Shawn Michaels. Then Rey Mysterio comes into the fray. 619 Shawn. Then Carlito and Chris Masters start to double team Rey Mysterio. And then Batista comes in to make the save and takes out both Carlito and Chris Masters. But then Kane comes in. Batista tries to, attack Kane, and obviously he does. And then Big Show comes in. And he tries to, take both of them down. But unfortunately, Big Show and Kane get the upper hand. And they end up double choke slamming Batista through the announcer's table. And I remember Taz, who was a commentator at the time when he used to be doing commentary for SmackDown. I remember vividly just hearing, "Holy!" That was like the vivid memory I remember having from that episode. So that's the first time I actually ever watched an entire episode of WWE. I was enthralled by it. I was like, wow, that was kind of cool. I want to see what else they have. So what got me really hooked on professional wrestling? It actually happened on Tuesday, November 29th of 2005. For some reason, I don't know why they were doing this, but they had this 1 hour SmackDown special take place. They had a match between Booker T and that guy, and they were having this big, advertised match. Big Show versus Rey Mysterio. David versus Goliath. So that was the big money match, I guess, for this special. So Big Show comes out. He has his entrance, that. And then Rey Mysterio comes out. Not to his music, but to Eddie Guerrero's music. And Eddie Guerrero's Lowrider. Now, keep this in mind. This is going to be a very important thing, because that Lowrider ended up sticking around for a little bit, for an important moment. So Big Show and Rey have a little match. Like, Rey's trying to, take Big Show down, but obviously because of the size difference, Rey's just being, kind of mauled a little bit. Rey kind of gets a little bit of an upper hand at one point, and then tries to go for a seated senton on Big Show, but Big Show catches him, and then power bombs him on the hood of that Lowrider. And, for a while, the match ended up getting stopped briefly, but then Big Show's like, all right, enough of this. Let me just finish him off. So he kind of pushed the referee away at one point, and then he grabbed the steel chair, and Rey then fights back. He kicks him in the knee, grabs the chair, and then starts wailing on Big Show, in the back and the stomach, and then two chair shots to the skull, back when they used to do that. And then Big Show falls into position for the 619. He hits it. And then Rey Mysterio gets on the top turnbuckle, then does a frog splash in tribute to Eddie Guerrero. So Rey is then crawling with all the strength he has left to get on top of Big Show to get for the pin. As he does, Kane's pyro, which comes off the ring posts, goes off. Then Kane comes out, Big Show's tag team partner, and at that time, they were the tag team champions at the time. The world tag team champions at the time. So Kane comes out. And Rey's in shock. And he's like, now stuck between a rock and a hard place. So Big Show and Kane ended up double choke slamming Rey. And they were about to do more damage. Then the lights go off. And the gong of the Undertaker happens. Undertaker then appears behind Big Show and Kane, and the funniest aspect I love about this moment is that Big Show's like, don't tell me he's here. No, he's not here, is he? And then Kane kind of looks right at him, and then just looks back like, yeah, he's here. I just look back at that, and I find that pretty funny. But at first, Kane just gets out of the ring and leaves, just leaving Big Show and Undertaker in the ring. And then they go at it for a bit. Undertaker gets the upper hand, then Kane comes back, and then Undertaker then choke slams Kane, takes him out. Big Show tries to go after Taker, and then Taker ducks, hits a boot on Big Show, goes over the top rope, and taking out both Kane and Big Show. So Taker's kind of looking down at them, and as he turns around, Randy Orton RKO's him from out of nowhere. So he's obviously, you know, thought he rid the world of The Undertaker at No Mercy the month prior when he locked him in a casket and then set the casket on fire with The Undertaker inside. So Randy Orton and his dad, Bob Orton, are now at ringside. So now Randy Orton now goes into the trunk of the lowrider. This lowrider's still chilling around here. So he's about to grab, like, I guess a crowbar or tire iron or something. And as he does, The Undertaker sits up and looks right at him like, you fucked up, buddy. And so Taker then goes right after Orton. They go at it for a bit, and then Taker's about to, like, guess, choke slam him somehow, like on the lowrider or whatever, and Bob Orton gets in the way and distracts Taker, and long enough for Randy Orton to clock him in the head with a crowbar or tire iron, and then Taker ends up landing on the, you know, on the passenger seat. He's like laying kind of like on the trunk and the passenger seat of the lowrider. He lands so awkwardly, and then Randy Orton grabs him by the back of the head and starts whacking him in the back of the head a few times to try to incapacitate him more. And then he has that idea. Randy gets that idea. He gets the voices in his head. He starts to hear voices in his head. This is way before he had that theme song. But he decided to get into the driver's seat of the lowrider. He revs up the engine, starts revving up the engine. And then he puts it in reverse. And then drives the lowrider with The Undertaker on the back of it. Drives it through the SmackDown set. Back when the SmackDown set looked like this. With the you know, the fist and the dome set. So he drives it through the stage, like the middle little panel. He drives it through the middle panel. Then he bails out of there. And then you start seeing all these explosions from the, you know, all the equipment behind the stage. And you're thinking, The Undertaker just got killed. And I remember watching this at my aunt's house. I don't know why I was there. Maybe because I guess something was going on at that time. But I remember I was watching this at my aunt's house in my cousin's room, because I think I was sleeping over that night. And oh my gosh. I just remember sitting there in the dark watching this unfold before me, and I was like, that was cool. That was really cool. I'm hooked. I'm actually hooked now on this. I'm actually hooked on this. I want to see what happens next. That's what made me become a fan of wrestling, was Randy Orton killing The Undertaker. So my first ever pay-per-view that my mom ordered for me was WWE Armageddon. Now, if you remember my story time video about how The Undertaker used to scare me as a kid, I talked about it a little bit there, and stuff like that. So that was my first ever pay-per-view, was WWE Armageddon 2005. And some of the matches they had was Big Show and Kane versus Rey Mysterio and Batista, and a tag match. Undertaker versus Randy Orton, Hell in a Cell. They had Matt Hardy versus JBL. They had Booker T and some other guy in their fourth match in the Best of 7 series at this time. They had Eminem against the Mexicools. And they had Juventud Guerrera against Kid Cash for the Cruiserweight Championship. So those are the matches I remember vividly from that night. So that was my first pay-per-view. Now, the first ever Royal Rumble pay-per-view I watched was the 2006 Royal Rumble. Now, I remember they had this open Cruiserweight Championship match with a bunch of Cruiserweights, which Gregory Helms won. He ended up holding on to that title for another year after that. They had a match between Ashley Mazzaro, the late Ashley Mazzaro, rest in peace, and Mickie James, with the special referee Trish Stratus. And this is during the time when they were doing the storyline between Trish and Mickey, where Mickey James was this obsessed fan of Trish. You know? So, yeah. So that was interesting. They had the Boogeyman. Oh my god, the Boogeyman. Against JBL. And the Boogeyman was so bizarre because he would eat live worms. I'm not joking. I'm not making this up. He was eating live worms. And, oh, jeez. Now looking back, I'm like, what was that for? What was all that stuff for? Oh, my gosh. But then they had the Royal Rumble match. So the first two participants in the match I remember vividly. Triple H was number 1, and Rey Mysterio was number 2. So Rey Mysterio had to run the gauntlet if he was going to win this. So he ends up lasting over 62 minutes and 12 seconds and wins the Royal Rumble by last eliminating Randy Orton, who was number 30. Which granted him a title shot at WrestleMania 22 that same year. So there was also a WWE Championship match between Edge, who just won the WWE title a few weeks prior to this, against John Cena, the former champion. And unfortunately, John Cena ended up regaining that title only a few weeks later. Now looking back at it, I was kind of like, why did they give Edge the title for a few weeks? Because I remember when he won the title, and then he had that live sex celebration in the ring with Lita. So that was interesting to watch. I remember watching it, and my mom was looking at me like, "What are you watching, dude?" But yeah, Cena regaining the title there, and then the final match of the night, the main event, was Kurt Angle, the World Heavyweight Champion, against Mark Henry for the World Heavyweight Championship. Kurt Angle won the World Heavyweight Championship the same week that the Edge Live Sex Celebration took place on SmackDown, because unfortunately Batista ended up getting injured at a live event where he wrestled Mark Henry, and he ended up tearing his tricep. So he had to, forfeit the World Heavyweight Championship and then have to, rehab and, get surgery and rehab for the next 6-7 months. So he was out of action. They had to crown a new World Heavyweight Champion. And then Kurt Angle, who was on Raw, ended up coming to SmackDown, and then they had this battle royal to determine the new World Heavyweight Champion. Kurt Angle was dominating. And then Mark Henry attacks Kurt from behind, and Kurt goes under the bottom rope, because the way a battle royal works is you go over the top rope and both feet must touch the floor to be eliminated. So you have to throw your opponent over the top rope and both feet hit the floor. Same thing applies for the Royal Rumble match. So Kurt goes under the bottom rope, so does Mark Henry, and he clears off the announce table and then does this like gorilla press to Kurt, and Kurt Angle falls onto the table and it breaks. So Kurt Angle is laid out, and then Mark gets back into the ring and then clears house, and Rey Mysterio eliminates Joey Mercury and Johnny Nitro, who were part of M&M. Because the way Mark Henry came back to WWE was because of this weird storyline that kind of fed into kind of a little bit of reality with Melina and Batista. Melina was claiming sexual harassment. I'm like, now looking back at it, I'm like, what was this for? So that's how it ended up happening. So it was Rey and Mark Henry, and they were going at it for a bit, but unfortunately Mark Henry eliminates Rey Mysterio, and you think, and they made you think, oh, Mark Henry just won. But then you realize, wait a minute, Kurt Angle wasn't eliminated. So then Kurt Angle gets up, takes his straps down, and goes, yeah! He loved to do that a lot at that time. So then they go at it for a bit. And then Kurt Angle ends up obviously eliminating Mark Henry and winning the title. So going back to their title match at the Royal Rumble. So Kurt Angle was trying to use the ankle lock, put on the ankle lock on Mark Henry, and Mark Henry would always, power out of it. So Kurt Angle, at one point, the referee gets knocked down. So Kurt Angle had to resort to using a steel chair. And I remember Mark Henry had Kurt Angle's former manager at that time, Daivari. You remember Daivari? He was originally with Muhammad Hassan, the terrorist character that the UPN network did not like because of the London bombings. Remember that stuff? So Daivari was trying to stop Kurt from getting back in the ring with the chair, and then Kurt Angle just stops, looks at him, and then just whacks him with the chair. And then so Kurt Angle takes the advantage and then hits Mark Henry twice in the skull with the chair. At first, when he got hit the first time, Mark Henry was like, Michael Cole put it like, he's punch drunk. I'm like, Jesus. And then at some point, Kurt Angle took off the second turnbuckle pad off, and then, did this, little maneuver where he made Mark Henry, go down and hit the bottom, the middle turnbuckle. And then he does a roll-up and pins Mark Henry to retain the World Heavyweight Championship. So Kurt Angle just retained the title. And he's celebrating for about 5-10 seconds. And then the Undertaker's gong goes off. And oh my gosh. Undertaker makes his return after the last time we saw him was at Armageddon. So he appears on a horse, on horseback, like he was on a chariot with 2 horses and stuff. He comes in and stares at Kurt Angle from who's in the ring, and Undertaker motions that does this. The motion that he wants a shot at Kurt Angle's World Heavyweight Championship. Then this weird thing happens. Undertaker then puts his hands up, and then you see all the pyro from above the ring happen. I'm assuming that because now looking back at it, now looking at the clip now, the effect was that he was shooting lightning at the top above the ring. But when it happened live, that effect wasn't there. So he does that. Then he puts his hands down, and lightning bolts hit all 4 steel posts on the top of the steel posts with all this pyro going off on it. And then next thing you know, the ring just collapses because of it. And I remember Taz again. Oh my God. This was kind of funny looking back at it. But when you look at the clip now, obviously he obviously goes, holy shit! But when it happened live on pay-per-view, it was kind of funny. I guess the guy wasn't, fast enough on the censor button. So what happened was it was, holy shit! And then you heard a beep right afterwards. It was kind of funny. So that's how the pay-per-view ends. And I was like, wow, that was cool. So then, my first WrestleMania, which was WrestleMania 22. Big time. This WrestleMania took place in Chicago, Illinois, in the Allstate Arena. The matches I remember vividly from this WrestleMania was the Money in the Bank ladder match, which RVD won. Mick Foley and Edge had a hardcore match, which the highlight of the match was Edge spearing Mick Foley through a flaming table. Mickie James and Trish Stratus had a match for the Women's Championship that was kind of more infamous for a moment that happened when Trish was about to do this, what she calls Stratusfaction, which is like this weird bounce off the top rope, bulldog, that she does. And for some reason, before she's about to do it, Mickie James then grabs her area, her crotch. And next thing you know, then afterwards, after that happened, this has been unfortunately now edited off the DVD and the network. This was deleted after after the actual pay-per-view itself. Mickie James does like this V-lick, like this, and oh my gosh, like, okay, very awkward. I guess she was trying to play into the whole psycho character that she was playing. And Trish ended up losing to Mickie James, and Mickie James ended up winning the women's title that night. Undertaker extended his undefeated streak at WrestleMania to 14-0 after defeating Mark Henry in a casket match. Shawn Michaels, the Heartbreak Kid, took on Mr. McMahon in a no-holds-barred match. And the highlight of the match was Shawn Michaels hitting an elbow drop from the top of a 20-foot ladder onto Vince McMahon on a table when he had a trash can on him as well. But the highlight was, before he did the elbow drop, he did something that WWE fans haven't seen in a very long time. the DX crotch chop, which at the time I guess was a hint, a tease of a potential DX reunion. So Shawn Michaels defeated Vince that night in that match. What a show that was. Then Kurt Angle defended his World Heavyweight Championship against Randy Orton and Rey Mysterio. A triple threat match, with the highlight was the long ass entrance Rey Mysterio had. But the biggest moment was Rey Mysterio winning the World Heavyweight Championship. I was so happy. I was so, I was going crazy when he won the Rumble and when he won the world title. I was so happy. I remember there was like a Playboy pillow fight evening gown match between Tori Wilson and Candice Michelle. Nothing to remember there. Tori won, of course. Then the main event was John Cena defending his WWE Championship against Triple H. Triple H came out looking like Conan the Barbarian. Then John Cena came out looking like a 1930s, gangster. He had the gangster entrance. And CM Punk was one of the gangsters hanging off that mobster car during that entrance. So now looking back at it, that was kind of cool to see. I remember the very first time I realized that was Punk. I was like, oh, that's CM Punk. And then realizing where they were, I'm like, well, kind of makes sense. They were in Chicago. So it kind of makes sense. So John Cena ended up retaining his title that night. And, that was my first WrestleMania. WrestleMania 22. And honestly, I think, to this day, I think it's my all-time favorite. Don't know why. I think WrestleMania 40 is a close second because of how awesome that WrestleMania was recently. That was an awesome WrestleMania. But, man, WrestleMania 22 was such an incredible show. I was so happy with all the results. So that was my first WrestleMania. Now, who were my favorite wrestlers growing up? So my favorite wrestlers growing up obviously was Rey Mysterio, Batista, Undertaker, CM Punk, John Cena, Triple H, Shawn Michaels, and many more. There's obviously a lot of other wrestlers I liked growing up, and I'll probably be here all day listing all of them and probably forgetting. So here's a full list of all my favorite wrestlers growing up. So that was all my favorite wrestlers growing up. So anyways, that's honestly really it on this story time. So I got introduced to pro wrestling through SmackDown vs. Raw from my childhood friend Michael. Then I watched an episode of SmackDown on November 25th of 2005. Then that was the first time I ever watched an episode of WWE. Then the moment that made me become a fan of pro wrestling was when Randy Orton tried to kill Undertaker. My first ever WWE pay-per-view was Armageddon of 2005. My first Royal Rumble and WrestleMania was Royal Rumble 2006 and WrestleMania 22 respectively. So anyways, that's really it on this story time. Honestly, I don't know what story time I will be doing next. So I have a few ideas for upcoming story times. Getting my first tattoo, going on Ethan Nestor's tour, meeting CM Punk, being noticed by Markiplier. Those are the ones I have at the moment right now. So let me know which one you want to see in the comments down below. And honestly, so what made you become a pro wrestling fan? What was the first time you watched wrestling? What was your first pay-per-view? What was your first WrestleMania? Let me know in the comments down below. So if you like what you saw here, hit the like button, subscribe, share this video with your friends. Be sure to ring that bell to be part of the notification squad. Be sure to check out my Instagram because my pull-outs of Markiplier, Jacksepticeye, even myself. I used to act as a cosplays on there, so go check it out. And be sure to check out my Tumblr and my Discord in the description as well. So until next time, JRDL96 signing out, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.